Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst. I will be chairing the meeting this morning. To my left is Mr. Brent McIntyre, and to my far left is Mr. Maurice Terrien. Our assessor for this morning is Mr. David Penner, and our recording secretary is Ms. Michelle Neepin. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. The first matter on the docket this morning is 500 Madison Street.
Can you state your full name, please?
David Thomas George Penner.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Can you state your full name, please? Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Can you state your full name, please? Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. Mr. Penner, please proceed when ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the roll number here is 0756913525. The property address 500 Madison Street. The owner is Group 111 Diversified Inc. The value in the roll for 2020 is $3,689,000. The details of the property are listed under property description. It's a property built in 1960 with wall heights varying from 12 to 20 feet. The land area here is 133,402. The land plan area is 2.53. Turning to page 2, you see that our requests for information were complied with. There's no subject sale history here, no recent sales. Subject property lease in place, the tenant is listed there, and the rent for the space, 52,781 square feet at $7.88 per square foot. Turning to page 3, we have a list of comparable properties to support our model rent. They range from $525 to $680 per square foot. Turning to page 4, we have our subject property market income, the income workup as it were. The leasable area is 52,781. The model rent used for this property is $5.36. Give us a potential rent of $282,906. To that, we've applied a vacancy loss of 4%. We've applied expenses of 2% to cover non-recoverable expenses, and applied a shortfall of $7,917 dollars which is based on $3.75 per square foot shortfall. That gives us a net operating income of $258,241. To that, we've applied a cap rate of 7% to derive the value of $3,689,000. Page 5 is just another summary of the income workup, which we just went over. Page 6 is a list of our cap rates, and you see that the cap rate selected here falls within the range of the 20th to the 80th percentile of our cap rate study, and we believe it's appropriate in this case. Page 7 are excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act pertinent to the appeal process. On page 8, we have an overhead view of the property and a few different views from different angles, and a street view on the bottom of page 9. Another street view on the top of page 10. On page 10 also is the actual income and expense mailer received by us. As you can see there, the net operating income of this property is $401,957. As you recall, our model income is much less than that at $258,241. So if anything, we believe our model NOI is a little bit conservative here, but it is the model that we're defending here today. Turning to page 11, other pages from the income and expense mailers, and there's the information regarding the lease in place on this property. Turning to page 13 is our addenda information, which many of you are familiar with. It just talks about a fresh look, being a reassessment that we conduct every 2 years. Cap rate evidence, there's a sampling of some cap rates from the marketplace there. Page 17, we speak about non-recoverable expense sampling. I'm sure you've heard this argument many times, but our analysis of the data in the marketplace has indicated to us that 2% non-recoverable expenses are sufficient to cover those, in addition to the shortfall allowance applied to vacant space. Page 18 just talks about IAAA standards. So what we have here is a model derived NOI and value. It is clearly much less than the actual NOI derived by the property, but we do believe it's fair. The cap rate selected is appropriate for a building of this size, age, and in this location. And we ask that the board confirm the assessment at $3,689,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions for the assessor?
Yes. Evaluation page 4, is this all from the model?
That is correct.
You inspected this property?
No, I have not.
And are you aware of the changes to the property due to the recent expropriation?
Yes, I am.
And what, in your mind, what were they?
There was some land expropriated from the, looking at page 8 at the bottom of the page.
Okay, so that's the physical part of it. Are you aware of any of the other effects of the expropriation, such as the loss in access or the tenant's posture on renewal?
No, I'm not.
The page 6, there's a reference here to the IAAO, so is it the position of the assessment department that you follow IAAO standards?
Yes.
On page 15, there's a brief discussion of the non-recoverable expense allowance. When was this decision made?
Which decision is that?
To change the rate for non-recoverable expenses?
I couldn't say, I'm not sure.
Before this assessment was prepared?
I believe so.
Okay, and when was this roll ready?
I believe it was delivered in May.
So before May of 2019.
I suppose it would have had to been.
And in this period of time, or around this period of time, are you aware of any changes in global standards and valuation?
No, I'm not.
Are you aware of any changes in financial statements for investment properties?
That's a pretty broad-based question. What are you getting at?
Okay, well, are you aware of what the financial standards are in valuation, GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, moves to change valuation from book to market? Issues like that?
I'm not aware of any changes in GAAP or anything like that.
And inside the assessment department, you receive mailers and have for quite some time. Has there been a decrease in non-recoverables or a decrease in costs reported?
I believe an analysis of the data indicated that 2% was sufficient to recover non-recoverable.
That was the recent analysis. And
Yes.
prior to that, when was the last analysis?
I believe an analysis happens every year or every reassessment.
But it has been 5% for quite some time, has it
That
not?
is correct.
Okay. On page 16, just these addresses that are listed here, just confirm what it says in page 15. They're not meant to be comparable subject to the, or specific to the subject property, is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the nature of the investigation done for these?
We would have looked at income information available and used that to derive a cap rate.
And what income information was available?
Owner-reported income and expense information.
In response to the city's questionnaires, annual questionnaires?
Yes,
And so at the time of actual sale, you're not relying on any income, revenue or expenses that was available at the actual time of sale, to your knowledge?
well, if.
I mean, you weren't there, or the
No, I
assessor wasn't there?
I didn't calculate these cap rates personally, so they're just there as a sampling.
Well, for example, the sale date of, let's just say the last one in there, 1100 Waverly, which was reported as September 2017. So what would the mailer have been on that particular property that you were reviewing? You would have received it in April likely?
The 2016 information would have been received in April or May.
Okay. And were you aware that there were changes in that property between the time of that mailer and the time of sale?
I'm not familiar to any great extent with that property.
And in preparing these, to your knowledge, were the IAAO standards followed?
I don't know, I didn't prepare them.
Okay. And in reviewing these, were you aware whether or not any of these property owners filed objections with the city to using their data for this purpose?
I'm not aware.
Page 9, the bottom picture, do you, could you identify what this is?
This is a street view of the
The
subject
bottom
property.
picture, the pylons, the box, and the white pipes?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Okay. And are you aware what the tenant uses this property for?
No, I'm not.
Just a couple of questions on the selection of the cap rate. Were using 7%.
Yes.
How is that selected?
Would be derived from the size, location, and age of the property?
Okay, so it's model driven.
Yes.
Okay, and I see at page 6 of your report for industrial properties, you have in the middle column there, say Winnipeg, 20th percentile 6.34,
Yes.
80th percentile 7.8. You effectively just selected one in the middle of that range, is that correct?
Yes.
The cap rate would reflect the risk, the potential risk to an investor acquiring this property, correct?
Yes, it would.
And so before selecting the cap rate for this particular matter, was there any investigation done with respect to looking into circumstances impacting the property, as Mr. Neufeld alluded to, the expropriation?
No, it wouldn't have been a site-specific selection.
Okay. And so I would assume then that the assessment department has not interviewed either the tenant or the owner of this property prior to this hearing?
No.
And then just to clarify, and I think Mr. Neufeld covered this, but the non-recoverable expense of 2%, and you would have, the last cycle included the 5% management expense as well, is that correct?
That's right. It was 2 and 5, and now it's just 2.
Thank you, those are my questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Therrien?
It's a 1960 building.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your normal, I know it's a combination of age, condition, and
Right,
location,
right.
and so on. Where's the cutoff on the,
I don't
date?
know
You don't know?
the specific bracket. Just at an age of 1960 with this size of property, suggested a 7% cap.
okay, you also mentioned that the mailer on page 10, I guess the word would be supported, the NOI on page 4. I think you used terminology of that nature generally anyway. Did you analyze that mailer at all? Because, you know, it's a gross lease with a number of incomes and expenses there. Do you know? Because the NOI is 401 and the city's at 258. So I'm trying to see what gymnastic you've made to use the mailer to support your page 4 NOI.
Not really using the mailer to support, I'm just suggesting that the model has generated an NOI which is far less than what is actually reported, which would indicate that the model has predicted a conservative income in reference to what's actually generated by the property. However, we are relying on the model, which would suggest that perhaps the lease rate is in excess of the market, and we stay with the market in this case.
But the income on the mailer, and that's my last question, is
Mhm.
415, while the income on the model is 283, so.
Right.
Trying to,
Well, the model is a net rent,
Yeah, I
and
understand that.
as you noted, the rent indicated is a gross or semi-gross. So that would account for the difference there.
okay, that's all, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
Just one question, has the expropriation occurred,
Yes,
and when did it occur?
I believe 2015.
And what was expropriated?
I see there was some work done on Madison. If you look at the overheads, in Madison, I believe the work was on the roadway there. So I believe that it was expropriated for expansion of Madison Avenue.
So effectively, they don't have any access to Madison?
Well, it appears that they do, but they did lose some of the land that was fronting on Madison.
But not that access from Madison?
Well, from the overhead, it looks like there's still access though, so I'm not really sure that access has been restricted.
Okay, that was the question.
I have no questions. Okay, thank you. Please proceed with your presentation.
I do have some rebuttal information, and it would pertain to all the properties today. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, don't scribble on your copies. Okay, there's one more sheet here.
Okay.
Oh, hey, what's this? Uh-oh. Brandon says. Oh, it's an application form for business tax stuff. Maybe I'll just go file it. So. Okay, the first, I'm gonna look at the one with the blue, and this is an excerpt from an actual report given to one of our leasing clients by our brokerage department. And the information has been taken off, referring to actual calculations. But the top header is what I wanted you to see. This is what we do in the real estate brokerage business. Take off 7% off the net rent for other costs. Remarkably, the same as 5 and 2. That's what the world does, and if we don't do it, we'd be misleading a potential investor or a client to calculate the net rent. It's not for vacancy, it's the net effect in the landlord's pocket. Always have to take that into account. The next 2 pages are a very interesting article from an MAI, and that's the US equivalent of AACI. And this is published in the Appraisal Journal, and it's dated, but it's old, but it's dead on. Talks about don't leave out your expenses or you're making a bad report. Again, nothing's changed. I mean, nothing's changed in appraisal since the early 1900s when Douglas Hurd codified most of the things we now see today. And you can even go further back to the 1700s when there haven't been substantial changes. Now, the last page is the end of that article and an excerpt from the IAAO standards on mass appraisal, and it says under the income approach that models for estimating gross or net income and expense ratios can be developed using actual income and expense data from a sample of properties and calibrating using multiple regression. Now, this will tie in with what our main evidence is, but it was also in response to the assessor's review of it. Now, as he stated, they're not aware of any change that happened in accounting, hasn't been. They're not aware of any change that's happened in appraisal standards, there hasn't been any. So this was a decision made sometime within just the city of Winnipeg to change the way they want to do things, which is solely limited to the city of Winnipeg. So it flies in the face of everything else that's being done in the world. Now, the single page I gave you, this is an excerpt from, at the bottom it identifies it's from a municipal board hearing for, to be heard June 28th, 2019. I was served with this approximately June 7th. And in here, of course, they're applying 5% for management and 2% for other. Now, this is for a 2014 appeal, but that's not the point. At this point in time, the assessor knew that they were planning on changing the way management fees were dealt with, or as I call them, non-recoverables were dealt with. They knew it at this time. The assessor said it had been at least May. I agree with them, because that's when the roll came out. And we have an appeal from a previous period where they're still embracing it. When nothing changes in there, then my question is, why wouldn't everything change if you believe that that you've been doing is wrong? And you know, what does consistency over years matter versus consistency of policy? Sorry, that's argument. The next thing I provided to you was on capitalization rates. And the first page is from the IAAO standard, and it talks about the requirements for reviewing their information. So this is the standard, and there's lots of very, very good quotes in here, but it basically tells you although all sales should normally be verified for use in modeling and appraisal analysis, for ratio studies, a subject of sales can be selected for verification if the verified sales provide a sufficiently representative sample for purposes of this study. And I'm reading from the first column above the third paragraph down. A requirement for verification if you're going to use a sampling, which is what we're looking at. The second page, again from the same document, talks about sales that are considered invalid. Acquisitions by large corporations, pension funds and REITs that involve multiple parcels should not be considered. Multiple parcel sales should not be considered for ratio studies. The next page is the chart that the city has provided, and this is the ratio study. Now, our comments on it, I'll provide the comments on the source. 294 Portage, we're now managing that property. We sold that property to the current purchaser. It was 20% vacant at time of sale, or greater, and it was in the midst of converting gross leases to net leases. So the in-place income was irrelevant to the sale. It wasn't purchased for that reason. 177 Lombard, we also managed that on behalf of the Workers' Compensation Board. They had a difficult history with the property. They had this great convergence of issues where for a very brief time they were full. It's had nothing but a vacancy problem for decades. When they were full, they sold it. A few months later, they were no longer full. So this one is a very poor example, and the information for that I know the assessor possesses because I made sure they got it. But the second issue with this, it's prohibited for use as a cap. If you look ahead to 2 pages, there's a letter addressed to the Assessment and Taxation Department, and I have 2 in a row of these, and they're dated for 2016 and 17. They're for our managed properties. And 177 Lombard is listed, 3166 Portage is listed, 3670 Roblin is listed, and as is 1100 Waverly. And they all say the same thing on this, that we expressly prohibit use of this data for the creation of capitalization rates or rates of return, as this data was not created for that purpose, nor was it produced for any sale or at the time of any sale. Now, this is in the assessment department's possession. They were told that this isn't the right information. It was not for sale, and we didn't want them to use it. Now, whether we have the choice for them to use it or not, one has to ask, why did we do this? Well, we know why. I told you about the building so far, so I'm just going to carry on. 3166 Portage, 3670 Rollin were a portfolio sale. They were purchased on a rather unusual situation. There were 13 in the portfolio, and it was done on a 10 to 20 year discount cash flow analysis. That was the valuation behind it. It wasn't on-place income. It was like a renovation project with a 10-year period of dealing with the property issues and with the return happening between years 11 and 20. In our business, we see this all the time. This is reasonable. What it says to you, though, is not a point-in-time cap rate sale. 394 Talbot and Maxwell, 25 Maxwell, the assessor reported their renovation sales. It's the same thing there, where we're dealing with properties that were sold for a different reason. And just to inform you, to get you an idea of why it's wrong, on the next page is an excerpt from the QSPAP, which is the Appraisal Industry Definition of Market Value. And we also have, they have 3 working definitions of market value that they believe are all acceptable. And they also give you the source of where they came from. Now, I would like to point out 18.8.4 IV, the last one. The price represents the normal consideration for the property sold unaffected by special or creative financing or sales concessions, etc. When you have a renovation project, it's creative financing. It's not a point-in-time cap rate sale. 333 Ward, you've heard this one to death. We sold the building, 5.5%. The parties met, this is what they agreed on, not their income and expense forms. 90 Park Lane was reported to me, I believe Stevenson was reporting this as the agent involved, that was an end user purchase, so there was no cap rate derived from the sale. It wasn't purchased for reason of investment. 1100 Waverly, this was, Manitoba Hydro had pretty much 90% of the space in there. They vacated it when their new building was ready. And essentially the site was almost 100% vacant, and over 6 years it was absorbed. And after the absorption, the owner sold it when he got up to the when he got the place leased, because face it, no one's buying a property that's not leased. It had a mix of leases. It has a mix of leases in it. Some of them are rents that include TI repayments. Some of them are rents that will be renewed at market but reflected. There's a very interesting one in there where the owner put in no work, the tenant put in all the work. The tenant got a good lease rate, but on renewal, he's got to go to market based on the existing condition of the building. In other words, he's going to have to lease his building on the improvements he put in himself. That's creative financing, by the way. So that's why we said 1100 Waverly, do not use that as a cap, because we knew what these were all about. So, I mean, a quick glance at these, just from our own knowledge base, we know how many of these are flawed. I can actually tell you that one is probably pretty close, 1271 Jefferson. That was another one of the properties we managed. And the 7.4 is pretty close. That's a shopping center, and I think we had it about 7.5. That is my rebuttal information.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Penner, do you have questions with the rebuttal?
Just one. You listed the IAAO standards, and at 5.5, you suggest that large property owner acquisitions and divestments, i.e. portfolio sales, should not be considered for analysis. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I agree that they shouldn't be used for ratio studies and multiple regression analysis.
That's all my question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Terry?
Yeah, I'm just curious, the letter of Mr. Chambers, what was he requesting? As requested in your letter of April the 8th, 2016, what was generally, without getting into too much detail?
No, the regular mailer, the annual mailer.
Well, yeah, that's all?
Yeah, we put these on the annual mailer
Okay.
to respond.
Okay, but he's also, you've also on your response in the last paragraph, basically, I guess, because you referred to gap, and in some of your comments,
Right.
which is a general accounting principles to make sure we all understand. The information has been prepared by property management professionals. It has not been reviewed or amended by accountants, appraisers, or legal counsel, and as such is limited. In other words, that's part, I guess, is what I'm trying to understand of this document in relation to the request.
Well,
Because you referred to gap and stuff, and
Right.
I don't think any of us are, I don't know, there might be professional accountants here, but.
well, I guess my referral to GAP earlier is one of the examples of that we have to be aware of. IFRS is the new thing, Independent Financial Review, something.
They got a new term.
Yeah, and what a publicly held corporation has to do, and this came out of Enron and Arthur Anderson, is that every 6 months, if they want to stay publicly listed on the exchange, they have to file valuations of their properties, and no longer at book value, but at market value. Because Enron jacked up their value in book, and there were a couple others that did that. So that's one of the changes. As it affects the appraisal business, it provided a lot of work for some people in that business, because it's the gift that keeps giving out. Reappraisal every 6 months, wonderful. But what I was mostly alluding to is the whole concept of property management and brokerage and the way, and appraisal, the way properties are valued. I mean, there have been no substantive changes. Now, these don't match what the city has, that's my point. The city is on their own, marching to the beat of their own drum. This is their own thing. Now, we can't be responsible for filling in the information that fits what they would like to see. We can only give them what we have. So we have some properties that are IFRS, some properties that are on the old GAP system, and we have probably 10 different types of balance sheets that we can produce for a specific client. And we give you, I mean, most of that paragraph was just to deal with the clause in the Municipal Assessment Act about we'll give you what's under our care and control. So we're complying. And the second part was, it's not value. It's not an opinion of value even, it's just the data.
Okay, thank you.
And, oh, sorry, the boring, long answer. But like when you look at a statement and you compare what the property manager has and you go against what the broker has, there'll be two different things. Because there are a lot of sales where it's known that you're gonna have a lease and you sell the property with the lease coming up, either that's been extended, renewed, stepped up, or a lease that's going to be filled in. So that's another reason why we never look at those brokerage, the property management statements. It's the brokers who have the data.
Any further questions?
Well, that's all for me, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
I have no questions either. Okay. Presenting your.
Yes, okay.
Forget where you were?
No, I was just
The process.
talking too much. I was trying to rest. And
You got 4 more to go.
I know.
Better not rest or what?
You know, there's certain people you hate the sound of their voice, and I think I hate the sound of my own. Okay, page 1 is a valuation with paid rent, which we did for purposes of explaining the situation. The one we're relying on is page 2, the valuation with market rent. And the reason for doing this is that the property has undergone a very serious set of issues occurring, problems occurring to it. And I'll go over those firstly. On page 3 is the picture at the top of the site in its current situation. On page 10 is the sketch of what the city expropriated. Now on the surface, it's just a small triangular shaped piece of land fronting St. Matthews. Actually, that picture on page 10 is the best one. And if you compare it to page 11, the before and the after, the front approach off St. Matthews, the access from eastbound traffic was taken away. And what they did as a result is they did put in a turn lane onto Madison from St. Matthews, but a semi-trailer can't make that corner. We've had experts testify. We had 2 truck experts provide written evidence and 1 truck expert testifying at hearing on this. And when was the hearing?
Last year.
Last year. We don't have the results yet.
This is a hearing before the Land Value Appraisal Commission as a result of the expropriation.
So for 60 years, how old is this building? Yeah, almost 60 years, they had access inbound, outbound from St. Matthews. Now they've only got a westbound inbound. And the side street Madison doesn't fit semi-trailers. It'll take a 40-footer, but it won't take a semi. So the way to get to this site, if you're coming from the west, is to drive all the way around north up to Ellis, come down St. James, come back in St. Matthews. The tenant doesn't like that. What they do is they bring in raw goods and semi-trailer, and they have about 200 people working in there. They're mentally challenged adults, and they do assembly projects, and then they ship them out either in semi-trailer or a smaller vehicle. And so they're dependent on the big turn for the semis and the buses that bring these adults to work every day. Also, what happened at the time is there was a corner piece of land where they had an approved permit to build a 10,000 square foot commercial site, approved. The city said, oh, we made an error, an administrative error, and they canceled it. It was just like a week before the expropriation they canceled it. And I don't know if that was a coincidence or not. Can't be cynical of the city though. And they lost that for expansion. Also at that corner were the gas works, and it's a main line transfer station for gas. So this is where the main gas line comes in, and it's subdivided into smaller lines, service lines that go to the individual operations. That's at the corner, northwest corner of Madison and St. Matthews prior to expropriation. Because the road went over there, they had to move it. And we have some pictures on page 12 as the project went along. Now, in moving that line, on page 9 is the place where they moved it from to the place they moved it to. Page 9, the bottom is the corner, and the top is where it moved to. So earlier I asked the assessor if he knew what the pylons were, and that's the new site. Now, it's put right in the grassy area that was supposed to be for parking for development to allow their 10,000 square foot expansion to occur. And also they were planning on doing some work with the existing building as well to maximize their yield and act in their own best interests. Now, the horrible thing about this, at the bottom of page 9, is I took this picture on a rainy day and the workers had gone home. There's a 9-foot trench filling with water, the walls are slumping in, and you got a crappy little plastic fence. It was falling apart, and everybody abandoned it. And I'm the least responsible person in the world, and I stood there and I couldn't go home. I waited there, I called the police. They said, no, nothing you can do. I called Hydro, no, nothing you can do. I called Workplace Safety Health. I said, I know it's a bad hole. It's supposed to be shored up. Oh, okay, well, we'll file your complaint. So I was there about 6 hours, and finally I smelled some gas. It turns out it was just normal venting, but I reported it. And Hydro was out in 15 minutes, the police were there, and I said, it's all yours. And I left. They had to stay. The next morning, there were going to be 200 mentally challenged adults walk by this site, and easily you could fall in, because the grass had slumped from below the fence. And that's just one of the tragic events that happened. So there's pictures that have the inside as well, pictures of the construction process. And then on page 6 there's the bus that goes in, and so this bus picture was taken during construction. So this, the bottom of page 6 is the bus coming, and the top of page 7 is the bus coming from, not Madison, from the street between Madison and Century, sorry, I forgot the name. So they could come down there and they do a straight in, a little bit of an angle going the wrong way in the street, but it's maybe 10, 15 feet offset. So you can see that's what they were using. So once it was closed off, they couldn't use that anymore, and they couldn't make the corners, so it was all around. And the net result of this is the tenant, who has a very good lease for the site, has not renewed. And they're up for renewal. I think they have to give notice at some point this year, and they haven't indicated whether they want to stay. They're dissatisfied with the site now because of these issues.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? Are we just looking at this part here?
Yes, that's the part.
Just that, we got nothing to do with this?
No,
Okay,
that's correct.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, just
But-
that little, well, it's not that little.
Right.
In a way.
But,
Okay.
you know, when
Thank you.
people look at expropriation, they think, well, we just took a little piece of your land. And what they can do with that is incredible. In this case, we shut off access on one side. We took away your office development, your retail development, and we took away your parking expansion because the gasworks moved. They didn't list that in their expropriation notice. They just said, we're taking your piece of land. And they said, well, the gas, who cares? It's on city land. But they plopped it right in front. No more parking there. The number presented to you on page 2 is the same value that was presented to the LBAC. I'm allowed to use it because I wrote it. This is the value we presented to them after expropriation. It was our feeling that after the changes that occurred to it, and based on the testimony, the truck people said, we don't want this site anymore. Well, we can't get in and out. We've got better places to go. You know, the truck, there's upcharges on trucks. They don't just come to your place for free. And so we're using a rent of $450 presented to the board. The vacancy is was the St. James industrial vacancy. I believe it was for 17. The structural reserve was calculated by us at 40 cents a foot, which was to account for roofing replacement, and the shortfall is 387, which was based on a combination of actual tax, estimated R&M, and utilities, which we took from the City of Winnipeg business tax numbers, which were within the range. Now, those numbers actually may be a bit higher because we have a higher human load. Higher human load means more heat, more light, more utilities, more water. But just to reduce the amount of arguments that we all hear, we just took the 235. So this ends up with an NOI of 184,721, and the cap rate is the same one we used at LDAC. And what we used was a rate that was consistent with the Collier's report and the reported cap rates. And the Collier's cap is the actual cap after adjusting it to the right language is on page 31. So our range of caps is 7 to 775 on single, 725 to 825 on multi. For all intents and purposes, this was designed as a multi-tenant property. The definitions for this are on page 29, and you can, by reading the definitions, it's quite obvious that this is inferior to the Collier standards. So you would see a rate at or above the higher end of the range. We do have numerous cap rates in the back as support, but this is the number presented to the board. The number on page 1 was calculated on the basis of looking at the paid rent and looking at the sustainability of it, which we knew that going to market after this event was gonna have a very, very large loss. And the problem is that we have never come across a cap rate of this sort where there's been a serious issue happen to a building resulting in such a loss of utility. So the cap rate could arguably be 12 to 15%. And so this was provided for, to give you an idea of perhaps a before and after more than anything else, before and after the expropriation. And before the expropriation, there's a risk we could lose income. After the expropriation, we knew how much it was, and we reverted to page 2. Lastly, I had mentioned about how a review of management, or as we call it, non-recoverable rates and other rates, should be reviewed with the market. Page 47 to 49 indicate a survey done of Colliers managed properties and these rates, and they are presented on page 50 in a graph form. And the rates that are at the higher end of the range are properties that are having difficulties with high turnover. The normalized ones are at the lower end of the range, and the line stabilizes at 7%. And that's what we have generally been applying in the past, 5% for non-recoverables and 2% for replacement reserve, consistent with valuation in the last 100 years. You have anything more to add?
No, just on the non-recoverables, and just to highlight, and I don't want to beat this drum more than it needs to be, but this is a new issue obviously for the board this year. As recently as the last cycle of this property, and I think all others on this docket, and perhaps several others, the city has been using a 7% overall. And the evidence that has been presented, I think falls well short of establishing such a dramatic change that we've now seen. So I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Neufeld has put forward. And just with respect to the expropriation, obviously that needs to be taken into account, not only with respect to rent, but the cap rate and the risk that this owner is going to face attempting to lease this space after this particular lease expires next year. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kenner, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. You mentioned problems with semi-trailer access to this property and suggested that it was eastbound trucks that would have a problem accessing property from St. Matthews, is that correct?
Yes.
There's no problem with westbound access?
No, westbound works, but trucks don't come from the west. 85% of them, at the hearing, we had traffic counts supplied by the city of all people that showed what the traffic was on the roads. And the traffic all came from Century and King Edward. I always forget the name of it. Because that's the truck route. They don't come from the shopping center.
So there's no,
They never had in the past either.
are semi-trailers not allowed on St. James?
No, they're allowed on St. James. It's difficult to maneuver, and it's a change in the routing.
Right, so, and when you talk about the risk to this property, you suggest that perhaps this tenant might not re-up. Do you have any evidence to that effect, or is that speculation?
There's a statement made at the hearing.
Do we have anything in your evidence
No.
to suggest that? That's all my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terrian?
Yeah,
Sorry, I should finish this. The tenant receives funding from the provincial government for their work. And so the process is a long, long process, which is why not having their renewal at this point in time is a serious matter. Because they're in the midst of getting their funding for, their submissions, I believe, have already been made for the 2020 budget. Now they're looking at 2021 budget.
Thank you. Mr. Terrian?
I'm just interested in, you're referring to, in your page 31, you referred to this as a multi-tenant building in your middle of the page, but Isn't that at the moment a single tenant
Well,
building?
my first.
Because there's a difference there in caps by about 0.5% between the two.
Yeah, first of all, I wouldn't put a ton of weight on that because it doesn't even match our standards. My first inspection of the site, it was multi-tenanted. There was, it was built, I forgot what it was built for, but there's the front office area which is self-contained, and then there's the back manufacturing assembly area that has two self-contained areas. And one of those self-contained areas was being used by the owner for storage on a sublet back to Imaginability, the tenant. Then, prior to the expropriation, they got and had plans approved to build in the front. So it was going to be multi-tenanted. It was in the past, and expropriation changed it all, so,
But right now, it's a one.
yeah.
And what you mentioned, okay.
And the other point on that is, this is a broker's report, it's interesting, but in actual practice, single tenant's a bigger risk than a multi-tenant. Because if you lose a single tenant, you lose 100% of your revenue. If you
Yeah,
lose a multi, you lose a fraction.
Yeah, but
I don't understand it myself.
Well, okay.
I'm not putting a lot of weight in the difference. I see
Well.
7 to 8.25, there's the range.
Yeah, well, I can see that. I've got to look at the evidence too. So you reduced the square footage by 1,500 square feet. So is that the amount that has been expropriated?
No.
Well, you're using
Yeah, I see
51,281, and we're at 52,781, which is 1,500 square feet. So I didn't know,
Just one sec.
okay.
I just have my source document here, I just want to look at it. Okay, I see. There was a proposed area to be demolished in the expropriation for trying to get trucks in the side. The actual rate now is 52,781. So I can adjust that number. I think most of this is all percentage driven anyway. Yeah, it just comes up to 2,376, 539 rounded to 2,377, 2,377,000. Sorry, this was it did take 3 years to get this to hearing, and we were looking at all sorts of fixes, and one of them was potentially to knock down a piece of that front office area to allow semi-trailers to try to come in off Madison. We ended up abandoning that because Madison wasn't wide enough to begin with. And it also required tree removal, which is a greater sin than anything now, so. But no, it wouldn't have mattered. Madison is useless as
Okay, my question was on square footage. I've got a few more. I know you explained this, how you switched approaches, but you had used 10.25 on your cap rate on page 1, it's there. Now you're using 8, and the city's using 7. So, it's quite a,
well, you see, mine aren't derived from models that only look at issues like
I know, but
area and age and things like that. I mean, ours are based on market. This is, limited use building. The reason we used 8 was, rather than a higher number, is that the rent at $4.50 would likely attract a user into the site.
So the 10 and a quarter was not, was
Well,
what?
the 10 and a quarter was a before review of it. This is what, before my expropriation, I know I'm going to lose land. I don't know how much it is, and this is the best guess. I have an existing lease in place. And by the way, that number doesn't have to be changed because we're using the lease income. But looking at it, that's assuming I'm keeping the lease. And we don't know to this day if we're keeping it or not, so we can't rely on that anymore. We have to now consider, either you lose the tenant or you take a dramatic cut in your rent. Given the nature of the operation, I don't think they're looking for a rent break. I think they're looking for a site. They need certain physical factors to deal with their clientele.
Okay, and your shortfall, structural reserve of 40 cents, which is $20,000, that's to cover what period in the future?
Oh, well, that's a standard thing, I had sent out the rebuttal information earlier, is a standard appraisal issues to deal with structural reserve issues. For example, in the past, the 2% and 7%, the 2 and 5 the city used, the 2% was for structural, and you'll see that also states that in this handout from an assessor, that it's to deal with the reserve. And you set it up, you look at your building, you figure what needs to be not a short-lived item, not a long-lived item, but a middle-lived item that has to be replaced at some point during the building's life. Industrial buildings, it's generally the ceiling. Now, we have a building just across the former rail line there, where they got a quote of $500,000 for their ceiling, for replacing the roof. It can go that high, similar sized property too, it can go that high, or it can just be several years of repairs. Those are non-recoverables. So every property owner budgets for it. In an office, for example, they'll budget for elevators and issues like that in their non-recoverables, and as well as roof and chiller units. Industrial is a simple heating. Actually, in this building, second thoughts on this, it has air conditioning because it's got a human load. So, and it has fresh air, which meets code, so that number should actually be higher. But anyway, that's what we look at.
So previously, if I may, Madam Chair, previously you were using 5 and 2.
Yes.
And now this is being replaced by the non-recoverable number plus this structural reserve
Correct.
today,
Yes.
which is 31.6 or something.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what percentage that is. I'm just trying to understand how you've approached this situation.
Well, a minimum application for non-recoverables is 5%. And in this case, we applied 5% because that's all the data we had on the site. You can see it from the statement, the actual non-recoverables appears to be $14,000 out of $401,000 in income, which is about 3.7%. You would have to always allow allowance of at least 5%.
Okay, I just want to understand how you would put these figures together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre.
I have no question.
And I have no questions either. Okay. Oh, would anyone like to summarize?
I'll do a brief summary. I believe our model in this case has predicted an NOI fairly conservative in relation to the actual net income reported. There is some question as to whether that income will be continued in the future, but we don't really know at this point. It's speculation that they may or may not renew. We think at this point in time, with an April 1st, 2018 reference date, that we have a fair value and a fair cap rate given the current circumstances. I think, given that it's a fair and equitable value, I ask that the board confirm the value.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen?
I think that most of the boards that we've discussed expropriation with understand the concept behind it. It's the forceful taking of land from a property owner. And the effects of it aren't just the dirt that was taken, it's the impact on the whole property. It's called injurious effect. Now, the city assessment model has no way of dealing with it. We know that from past experience. They don't consider it. In this case, the issues that the property faces are large. There are some properties that have been expropriated where it's less of a factor. For example, a complete expropriation is take it away and pay them what it's worth. But the worst is the partial expropriation, because it's like leaving half an apple on the floor. It's gonna have damage to the rest of the apple, and that's what we're dealing with in this case. We replicated the approach that was brought to the LDAC, and I think it's a very reasonable calculation estimate of value on the, we once had an assessor say that he thought that expropriation was a windfall, like you're making money, and Janie's laughing, because we just couldn't stop laughing when we heard this. It's not extra money, you're losing your value on your site. I don't know if you have anything to say.
Yeah, I just, assessor here is clearly just simply relying on the model. A little bit surprising given the unique circumstances of this property. Any appeal is obviously site-specific, but here we have an expropriation by the city of Winnipeg. This is a Winnipeg expropriation. The city is well familiar with it, so somewhat surprising the assessor has not actually gone out and inspected the property, analyzed the impact, the obvious impact that it has to the remnant piece, the access issues, other issues that Mr. Newfield went through. That has to be reflected in the cap rate and the risk to this owner going forward. And so for those reasons, I would suggest that Mr. Newfield's valuation is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question about the next property.
I have a question about this one.
Oh,
Sorry.
no.
No. Okay, Madam Chair, I respect your position.
Go ahead.
Just how much land was actually expropriated? Like, this is a big site.
It's not
Good
how
question.
much, it's what part was taken, that's crucial.
I just wanna know how much. I know what part was taken based on your evidence, but
Yeah.
how much land is that in total?
Could you tell based on
Well, you can't do it on the map here.
it's a slice?
1,500.
No, that was.
Should we all take guesses and see who's the closest?
2,000 square feet.
Is that what it is?
I don't know.
No.
11,284 square feet.
Good guess.
Thank you. That was, I'm done.
11,280?
284, yes.
Okay. Okay, any further questions about this one?
No, I'm done.
Okay, just one question, and then we'll take a quick break, but so the next matter is on the docket, it's listed twice?
Yeah, so there was a duplicate appeal. It's effectively the same evidence that I had filed an appeal on behalf of the the tenant, and Mr. Newfield filed one on behalf of the owner. So it's there's two files, but there's one presentation. So,
Oh, okay, I just wanted to clarify what we're doing.
yeah, no, fair enough.
Okay, great, so why don't we just take a 5-minute,
Sure.
just a short. Okay, I'll call this meeting back to order. The next property on the docket is 1345 Redwood Avenue. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The roll number is 1404156900. The address is 1345 Redwood Avenue. This property is owned by Pirate 1345 Redwood Avenue Holdings, Inc. And the value in the roll for 2020 is $10,327,000. The actual year built to this property was 1953. We have an effective year built on it of 1990. The wall heights are 22 feet. The rest of the pertinent details are on the front page: land area and plan area and gross floor area, and the land to plan ratio is listed there as well. We would consider this an investment grade property being owned by Pure Investment Real Estate Trust. Turning to page 2 of my brief, we see that the owner has complied with our request for information. We have a sales history listed here. This property was purchased by the current owners in March of 2012 for $9,700,000. There is a lease in place on this property. The tenant is Boeing Canada, and they have a leased area of 112,340 at a net rent of $6.70 a square foot. Turning to page 3, we have some comparable properties to support the model rent in this case. Turning to page 4 then, we have our income valuation summary. We're using a leasable area of 111,763 square feet, a model derived rent of $6.49, and that gives us potential rent of $725,342. To that, we have applied a vacancy loss of 3.5%. The EGI therefore is $699,955. Expenses at 2% and shortfall gives us a net operating income of $671,287, and we've used an appropriate cap rate of 6.5% to determine the value of $10,327,492. Page 5 is just another summary of the income value, which we've just gone over. Page 6 is our cap rate tables. Page 7, the MAA excerpts. Page 8, we have some photos of the subject property, some overhead views and some different angles, and a street view of the property on the bottom of page 9. Page 10, we have the income mailer submitted to us by the owner. As you can see, the leasable area listed there on the far right is 111,763, and that's what we've used in our income valuation. Also noted that the actual net operating income recorded here is $694,321. Our model comes in a little bit less than that, but certainly our model in this case has done a good job of predicting the net income from this property. Page 11 and 12 are further information. Again, page 12 showing a leasable area of 111,763. Page 13 is another listing of the rent roll. In this one, it shows 112,340. So that's conflicting information, but we are using the 111,763. But it does indicate there a net rent in place of $670 a square foot on this property. Page 14 is just a status of title on this property, a sales mailer on page 16 and 17. And starting at page 18 is the addenda information, which we've already gone through, just indicating our approach to this and the fact that we've used 2% to cover non-recoverables as opposed to the 7% historically. So based on the evidence presented, we ask that the board confirm the value at $10,327,000. We note that it's fairly close to the purchase price from 2012. You would expect a property of this type to maintain its value over time and appreciate from 2012, and it is right in line with that sale. So I'd ask the board to confirm the value. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
I'll have some preliminary questions, and part of this is, I guess somewhat of an objection, and I know that Mr. Newfield will speak to this as well, but as part of the information mailer, page 16 of your report, at item number 5, and Madam Chair, this is a concern of the parties that Mr. Newfield has expressed to the assessment department, is there's a question that is directed to the recipient regarding an appraisal report or opinion of value completed on a property at the time of sale. And I guess the objection is that the assessor in my submission has no right to request an opinion of value from somebody else. It's his, he has the right to obtain data, factual information with respect to the building. Somebody else's opinion as to value is completely irrelevant. Opinion evidence generally is a matter of law, is inadmissible unless it's absolutely necessary. And it's necessary when you have a technical matter that, where the court or the tribunal requires it. To say the least, that if opinion evidence is going to be given, the person who prepared that report should be here to speak to why they've given that opinion, qualify for what purpose have they given the opinion, what is the effective date, what assumptions did they make. They don't have any of that. Section 16 of the Municipal Assessment Act is the provision that gives the assessor the right to request certain information that might be relevant to the assessment of the property. Someone else's opinion is not necessary, it's not relevant. I note, in fairness, the assessor does not appear to be placing any reliance on it. There's also some sales history here. The assessor will be aware that it does not appear that he's relying on the sale either. It's just a point of contention. It's also, Mr. Newfield will point out, these appraisals are copyrighted, and there's standard language in those materials that indicate that they're for the exclusive use of the recipient and are not to be reproduced without the consent of the author. And so I'm assuming that consent wasn't given, and I just wanted to raise that, and I know Mr. Newfield will have some comments as well. So with that, maybe I'll just turn to some very brief questioning, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Newfield. So,
Thank you.
Mr. Penner, just to clarify, you're not placing any weight, I take it, on someone else's opinion of value. You're just doing your own analysis.
That's correct.
And the sale, the assessment department is not relying on the sale either, correct? Back in 2012, I believe it was.
No, we've just noted it as a fact, a background fact in the case.
You're aware that this property has come before the Board of Revision several times over the course of the past 8 years?
Yes.
All right. And the board hasn't relied on the sale value either, have they?
I don't know what they
All
rely
right. Did you review the file information from the past cycle, Mr. Penner, the 2018 assessment?
I did to note the board decision on it.
The board decision, and so I actually have a copy of the board order I was going to be presenting in rebuttal, but I can do that now just for ease of reference, so you have it. And also, while you're there, I'll just give you, this is the assessor's evidence, or just an excerpt of the assessor's evidence from the last cycle.
Thank you.
So just with respect to the board order, you'll note this came before the board in 2017, and the board used a cap rate of 7.5%. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I can see that.
All right, and then also with respect to the assessor's valuation, I just note that the assessor was using a rent of $6.25. Is that correct?
Yes.
And they were also using an overall expense of 7%?
Yes.
All right, so the change would have, just to clarify, the change to 2% only would have been within the last cycle, is that right?
That's correct.
You mentioned this building is constructed 1953, I believe?
Yes.
Yes?
53 1953, yes.
1953.
Mhm.
And it's an effective age of 1990. Have you inspected the building?
I have not.
Do you know why there's an effective age of 1990?
I would guess that improvements made to the building affected it.
Okay. But to clarify, you have not interviewed the tenant in this building, or the one from Boeing?
No, I have not.
This property is not situated in an industrial park, correct?
It's roughly part of an Inkster Industrial Park, but
It's adjacent to actually a residential community.
yes.
With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Newfeld.
Thank you.
On the first matter of the quotation of any excerpt from an appraisal, with Mr. Mercury's objection is that appraisals are copyright and written authorization is needed. We brought this matter up with the assessment department on 5 other occasions, and when we have the time to get to it, we will have them remove any reference from their work because they don't own it. They don't have the right to use it. Possession does not give anyone reliance, and it'll say that right in the appraisal. This is a standard boilerplate that we put in. We don't like it. And the reasons that people think that you use them for the wrong reasons, we don't like that. The last couple of times we had more time to do it, and we got hold of legal services, and that was in Todd Hewitt's days, and he just came down and ordered them, take that out. Didn't even have to look at it twice. You don't have the right to do it. But, so I had contacted the supervisor for this
Well,
area.
Sorry to interrupt. I have heard your position on this
Oh,
already,
okay.
so actually more than once.
No, I was just giving
Oh,
the background.
but,
I had
yeah, no,
notified the supervisor, and then I had
And I understand that, but just in the interest of time, because we're still
registered
looking more
with
to.
311, and I haven't heard back. Okay.
But, yeah, so right now we're just
Got
asking
questions?
questions, sorry.
In your testimony, you called it investment grade.
Yeah.
Do you have a classification for investment grade in the assessment department?
I would make that call based on the ownership. Real estate investment trust typically would be,
But you have a classification called investment grade.
it's just a statement, that's my
Oh,
opinion.
okay. Well, I
that it
just
would
wanna
meet
be
the
clear.
standard of investment.
You have
grade.
lots of different subcategories for different building, correct? Like an office, there's OFB, OFS, and et cetera, et cetera. Do you have an investment grade category for industrial?
No.
The wall height you've listed is 22 feet.
Mhm.
Where's that measured to?
I'm not sure.
It's been my understanding that the city measures to the outside of the building, being exterior height. That would render the inside at 19 feet approximately. Is that a good building height?
I can't verify that 19 feet, so I won't comment.
Okay,
on that.
is 19 feet a good building height?
I think you typically like to see 20.
Are you aware of the circumstances of this original lease?
No, I'm not.
On page 10 of your brief, you have an income and expense statement, and this, I take it, was submitted electronically?
Yes,
Has this been altered?
by who?
I don't know. Has this been
I don't
altered
know.
by anybody after it was put up by the owner?
I don't believe so.
If it were altered, would that, never mind. And then I think we've gone over the ground already on our, I'm assuming our cap rate rebuttal and management fee has been discussed, and repeat.
Applies to all.
Good. And so Jamie took my other questions. I was gonna ask about this age thing. Okay, fine. That's all I got.
Okay. Mr. Terrian,
I have no questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre.
My observation is nobody knows the square foot of leased area. on this building, both parties.
Yeah.
The lease on page 2, Mr. Penner,
Yes,
shows 112,340.
right,
You used 111,763,
which appears on the mailer on page 10.
but not on the rent roll.
On the red roll, it shows 112. 112,340.
And that's on page 13, right?
Right.
So nobody knows the correct leased area of the building?
I just follow the money, that's the right answer.
Okay, that was my question.
Okay, and I have no questions. No, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Mercury is representing the tenant, I'm representing the owner. We have agreed to do one presentation, but we also wanted to provide you two perspectives. Coincidental that 500 Madison, we did the same thing, and it just happens like that. It's the last time you're gonna see this. We've done a workup on page 1, which would be more from the owner's perspective. And in it, we used paid rent, but a significant cap rate difference, and I'll get to that. Why? It's basically because we have a decreasing NOI over time, which is a pretty poor investment. And remembering that the concept of capitalization isn't a physical observation, it's based on anticipation, on your income. And page 21, page 22 is just an explanation of that. In the income approach, an appraiser analyzes a property's capacity to generate future benefits and capitalizes the income into an indication of present value. So the concept is if your revenue is continuing to decline, you're not capitalizing paid income on a market rate. You're understanding that your income is declining, and you'll see through that. Now, from a tenant's perspective, on page 2, this was the only property available to Boeing that had 100,000 square feet. Boeing is a big business. They have a 600,000 square foot building on Murray Park, and they needed another 100,000 square feet. And in Winnipeg, that's very difficult to do, especially to get it in proximity to it. There were some vacancies in Transcona, but that wasn't reasonable. So when you, our rule of thumb in the real estate business is that if you have a vacancy and it's big, it's the landlord's problem. If you're a user and you need a big space, it's the tenant's problem. Because the standard size of industrial in Winnipeg is 15 to 30,000 feet. Those are the ones that are easily traded and exchanged. And when you start to go higher than that, and it becomes more and more difficult. So essentially what we had was a seller's market, and Boeing had a need as determined by their sales of aircraft that they needed capacity to build. We should be happy that they chose Winnipeg to put this expansion in and not Everett, Washington. And disregard this rent and look at market. And that's what the perspective on page 2 does. Now, background information on page 4 is the mailer that was sent in. And this I got from the owner. And you'll notice that it does not match the assessor's page 10. There's an expense between lines 214 and 215 which has been removed. And I guess that expense goes down to automatically total the bottom. I don't know how it was changed or what the process was.
So, sorry, which line?
Between line 214 and 215, legal fees.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
And I know we have enough lawyers in the room to know how holy legal fees are. You can't touch those things. So this is the NOI, the last one of 2017. So the city's form has been altered. Don't know how, don't know what, where. Page 5 just totally out of order, but this was our workup. We had, I think there's a rent table somewhere, and we had just, oh, it's on page 9, and we had just put them in a graph form, that if you're just using a market rent, you're looking for 100,000 feet, that the intersect is $3.93 a foot. So that would be market for 112,340 square feet. This is a pure Excel calculation based on our inputted data. The inputted data on page 9 are clean leases, in that they don't include TIs, there's no creative financing in them. We have them in our records. I know that there's some discrepancies because the city actually has a higher number for an older year on the property on Mission, but that's a side issue. This is probably, if you're going to use regression analysis, at least we're showing you the work. This is what you need to see, not just, you know, a phantom that you're trying to explain to somebody why you picked the rent you did. This is the right way to do it. Now, on page 6 and 7 are the statements from the previous years going backwards, 16, 15, 14, 13, and in the highlight are the net operating income to the building, and what you see is a decline. Now, what this is doing is tracking the non-recoverables generally, and so the lease itself is not a pure net lease. It's got a lot of costs picked up by the landlord. So if you had a building where 5 years of performance is showing not just a small decline, but a significant decline of $100,000, or probably 14% of its income over this period, it has to go into your valuation. Page 8 are the table of the actual vacancy rate in the city, and this is the wrong table, incidentally, that was inserted here. This is the one we're relying on. I have the right table with me. The Inkster vacancy is actually 5.1%, and the overall city is 5.7%. This one that was provided is, the guy who does this report does this for owner occupied too, which is ridiculous, because why would you use a vacancy rate for an owner occupied property? These are properties that are listed for sale, which is not the same as a calculated vacancy rate, so wrong table. Rents are page 9, and disregard the ones on page 10, they were just for another one, and then the zoning. Another issue to be concerned about in the zoning is, as Mr. Mercury's questions indicated, you're adjacent to a residential zone. So all commercial zoning has a setback. Top of page 11, the rear side lot line abuts the side of a rear lot line of R1, R2, RMF. 25-foot yard must be provided, and it has to be landscaped, not parking. So it's over and above the regular setbacks. You need a landscaped 25-foot zone against residential. Now, because the site's been here since 1953, whatever's there is fine, it's grandfathered. It's where you go to have a change in use that you would run into this issue. And there have been lots of decisions on this through our illustrious civic administrators, where in some cases they put 150-foot buffer zones from residential to industrial, including 50 feet of landscaped and 100 feet of non-building use. And that's just the reality of abutting a residential zone. So a rebuild, if you got a 1953 building, tear it down and put a new one up, you'll be hit with new zoning. So that's a factor in the cap rate as far as reaching the end of your economic life and looking at a rebuild. The building is listed by the city at 22 feet. Generally a roof truss is about 3 feet, depending on the age. The older it is, the thicker it is. The world doesn't care about outside height. They care about inside clear height. And that's the key number, and it all relates to pallet height. Now, I've got the Johnson report saying 16 feet for clear height, and that's the number that counts, not 22. And it's all based on pallets. That's 3 pallets, 5-foot pallets. You go to 21, 23 feet, you got 4 pallets, and you go to 27 feet, you got 5 pallets. That's how the market treats industrial buildings, is how high can you go. The higher you go, the more pallets you stack, the more valuable you are. We have a low building. Cap rates on buildings like this, it's certainly not investment grade. It was, although it's being rented by one of the largest companies in the world, and the owner is a large real estate investment trust, the circumstances surrounding the acquisition were it was the only product on the market. It's not investment grade, it was desperation grade, and it's worked for them, and that's good. But going back to the market, you wouldn't see this as investment grade property. I wouldn't beat the age issue to death on it. I would focus on the ceiling height being poor and the location near residential as being the definable factors. Age should be stated remaining economic life, and those two issues suggest a lower remaining economic life of the property. So we would be looking at, on a typical basis, at a higher end of our range, which would be, with all due respect to Mr. Therrien's earlier question, 825 in that ballpark on a normal basis. Now, when you put a lower rent on it of $4, there's a bit more upside available, which is why we want 8% on that. Again, talking about anticipation. Looking at the paid rent on, with a declining income on the current amount, we can't rely on this, and we know that we're gonna have decreasing NOI. Our best guess estimate was 9.25%, much like the other site. No one collects data on overpriced, overleased properties as to what they're going to rent at when they come up for renewal. Our best guess was 9.25, which renders that particular analysis as less reliable than purely going fee simple. So fee simple, page 2, least fee, page 1. Presented both of you because our two clients have different views on it. As an appraiser, instructed to look at the fee simple, we would have to then look at page 2, given the problems I've done. And that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Penner, do you have questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Neufeld, you've given us two approaches, two varying opinions of value. Which is the opinion of value that you're presenting to us here?
Well, as I summarized, I think we have to go with the fee simple, page 2.
So you're defending page 2?
Yes.
So, this property has a net lease in place, it's stated in the rent roll, $670 net, $957 gross. And given that, you feel $4 is an appropriate net rent?
Well, I think the people who filled this form out make airplanes. They're not accountants or appraisers. I don't think they know what a net rent is. So that's your statement, it's a net rent, but it's obviously not a net rent.
Well, it's listed on page 13 in the rent roll as the net rent. It's also listed in the mailer. I don't think you provided the rent roll there. It's listed in several different places as net rent, but it's your opinion that it is not?
Not opinion. If in doubt, look at the numbers.
Which I am.
The numbers say
670.
line 218 does not anywhere near match line 108.
Line 208. Right, but we start with the net rent when we're
And
calculating the
take a look
potential.
at line 215. It clearly says non-recoverable realty taxes.
Right, which is,
So we do not have a net lease.
well, no, they are recovering, 216 for property taxes, so they are recovering their taxes, are they not?
It says they're not. They're not recovering a portion of them.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Perhaps you can explain the line at 216, 241, 531. Can you tell me where that number comes from?
That's the owner's number that they've got. And then you compare it to line 121.
Right, so we know the property taxes are the recovered, 217, plus the non-recovered, 11,000, which would total 229, which we know from the tax bill that that's the case. So it looks like they've made an error there and over-reported the property tax.
Well, I haven't seen that tax bill, and of course, anyone who reads a lot of statements knows that the concept of the taxes, you know, the tax bill has other things stated in it than taxes. There's frontage fees and encroachments and things like that. I don't know if you can ask me a question on that, because your question was, is it a net lease? And I said, absolutely not. The evidence is right here, it's not net.
So they've made an error in the reporting?
I don't see an error. I'm saying that it's not a net rent. They made an error in calling it net because this isn't their business. They don't know what a net rent is.
So they have made an error because they don't know what net rent is.
Well, it's an excusable error, because that's like asking me for my opinion on somebody's brain function. I might have a really good guess, but I'm not qualified.
So we shouldn't rely on the owner's submission that they're paying $670.
I think that the numbers you can rely on, I think that statements, see, the definition of gross and net is not one that is just arrived at in, without review and analysis. The numbers are there, but calling something gross or calling it net leads to an opinion. And if you ask a non-expert for an opinion, this is what you're going to get. In my experience, I've probably only seen one absolute net rent in my life.
Right, well, we understand that what net is, and that there are non-recoverables, correct? And you're saying property taxes is one of those?
Well, there's, you know, a few years back, I read someone who's trying to define it, calling things single net, double net, triple net, and along the way, he would say, they would state that, you know, if it included the taxes and, or, the repairs was to be single. If it included, you paid, I know, I gotta go. Paid for your utilities, it was single. You paid for utilities and taxes, it was double. You paid for utilities, taxes, and CAM, it was triple. Okay, great, that's a layman's way of looking at it. It's a little too glib for me. Just look at the statement without thinking, trying to make these definitions.
Sure, okay, so look, just looking at, you've included the 2015 and 14 mailers. Looking at the property tax line, the property taxes match 100% with the recoveries for property taxes in 14 and 15. It appears that there's been a small amount of non-recoverable taxes, but for the most part, they're recovering 100% of their property taxes.
Well,
Historically, would you agree with that?
let me just see. So you're saying that historically, okay, so 15 was a recovery. There's a shortfall in 14, and 15 was recovered, and there's a shortfall in 16.
Where's the shortfall in 14?
14? No, I said 13 when there was a shortfall.
Okay, So, in your opinion then, an appropriate net rent, despite what they say, as being $6.70, $4 is more appropriate?
No, I said that's the fee simple rate. I said what they're actually getting out as a net is not the 730. It's closer to 694.
Staying on page 2, the fee simple valuation, the amount for non-recoverables and structural reserve, 22,000 and 28,000. That works out to 11.25%. Does that replace the old 5 and 2?
I'm not replacing anything, I'm just applying appropriate methodology. We generally will use 5% as a number to represent non-recoverables, and then a rate per square foot to represent replacement reserve. In this case, there's an awful lot of ceiling space, and we have a very old building. So it's reasonable to expect that that's going to cost them more over time than a typical building. And that would be budgeted. Every building's different, and the 5 and the 2 the city used were standardized rates, and most industry people didn't complain much about it because they were close enough to what would have been applied in real life. There no longer are.
So you're not using 5 and 2 any longer? You're using...
Not at all, no. No, we just determined this year that that the 5 and 2 was a truce that was done 15 years ago, and it was close to what the market was, so it seemed fair. We don't believe the city can change the rules on a matter that's much larger than them. It's not the way the rest of the world works, and it's not sustainable. It's their short-sighted opinion. So I guess we'll have to look at actuals now.
Okay, so looking at actuals, let's look at the actual net income on this property then. So depending on which mailer you're looking at, and I believe on your paid rent calculation, you suggest the actual is 694,000, but you do feel that 363,000 is more appropriate?
That's on the fee simple basis. We have an overpaid rent that was negotiated with not meeting market definition. And I did hand out those definitions, but it does not meet. There was, on the part of the tenant, they were faced with the lack of conditions requisite to a fair sale. There was duress.
So given, last question, given that the owner purchased his property in 2012 for $9,700,000, would they be a willing seller at $4,549,000?
Well, I don't know. That's a factor probably to do with the investment markets rather than the taxation markets, because they would have the opportunity to sell the Boeing lease and look at it on a discounted basis. So if it hits the market on that basis, it's being sold on the strength of Boeing, not the strength of the lease. If it goes dark, they're going to be faced with $4.
Right, so we're bound to determine the fair market value, which would be a willing buyer and a willing seller, fully informed.
When you're in
Does this represent market value in your opinion?
When you're an appraiser and you dispute the difference between fee simple and leased fee, the responsibility is to demonstrate and to explain why you disagree. And this is, and I appreciate that it just adds an extra layer of confusion to the board. I could have just disregarded it, but then I would have been irresponsible in my response in what I have to do as an appraiser. I have to show you what the least fee is, page 1. I have to go to fee simple, page 2. We're governed by the Municipal Assessment Act that says, look at fee simple. Many times I say, I think the paid rent's pretty close to fee simple, we can use it. This is not one of those cases, because we had actual knowledge that there was duress on the leasing. And it wasn't speculation. We spoke to the people from Bowen, we spoke to the participants in this deal. It was their only option.
That's all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terrian.
Quite a gymnastic for us at the moment. I think I understand what's going on. It's just I guess I'll just leave it at that for now.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hate to harp on this again, but there's discrepancies in this leased area from the
Yeah.
previous
I don't know.
leasable areas submitted for 4 years. The building was 112,340. And we get 2 mailers from both parties that are both different.
Yes,
They're different.
that was, I had that marked task.
Yeah, I do.
See, I was avoiding that controversy by going with a higher number, because it was only, what, a 1% difference.
So here's my question.
What
Yeah.
happened?
Oh,
And-
just they used city used 111 last time around.
I mean, certainly we'll place our decision based on the evidence. But when you get mailers submitted the same year that are different, how do we place anything on the mailers?
Okay, the error is 0.5%.
I realize that.
Right, but what
And
happened?
then
Why
it's
are there
question
two
of reliance. Why
mailers?
can you, well, I suppose that's my point with the assessor's question about gross versus net. I mean, we're not dealing with real estate professionals filling these forms out. They got the numbers right on the cash. That's all they were focused on. So,
But for 4 years, they had it at
I've
112,340.
got clients that say, how big is your building? They say 20,000 feet. Well, you know, you get the right numbers, it's 19,700 or 20,312. They don't care about that, it's 20,000. That's in their mindset, that it's not a factor to them. But if their bank reconciliation doesn't match what the payments coming in, then there's hell to pay on the other side. That's my experience with them. We have an entire floor in our office is people who are just checking these numbers and making sure that the cash adds up right. And you say, how big is your building? I don't know. We don't care.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Boeing does have, I'm sure, have bean counters. I'm sure they have lots. Because if they make aircraft, as you mentioned, but they need darn good accountants as well.
Boeing didn't measure this. I can tell you that in their other building, they have an AutoCAD department, the one they own, and their number for size came up 60,000 square feet different than the city size. The
And you
city-
can't go into that place either.
Well, we got in.
You did?
Yeah, I passed the security
That's
test.
just been it.
Yeah.
But
Hey,
I had no questions.
That's it for me.
Okay, and that was my question also,
Go
like
ahead.
discrepancy. So, is there a need for summary on this?
I'll do a brief summary. We've used a model net rent of $649, which is less than the actual rent in place. It's a little bit more believable, in my opinion, than a net rent. The net income derived of $363,000. And on that basis, I would ask the panel to confirm our number.
Thank you.
in our standards, we have what's called a reasonable appraiser test. And it's to ask yourself a question, what's reasonable and not reasonable? I don't think a $6 rent is achievable in a 1953 aged building with a 16-foot ceiling height. That's just not reasonable. We know that there was a undue pressure to get a site for them for their contract. We know that. A reasonable amount, take a look at the other properties today, the one you just heard. Slightly newer building that the city was at $5 rent at. And it's half the size and close to Polo Park with a bus route. But that's the issue here, is this is very rare that we come across situations where there's such a discrepancy between the least fee and the fee simple. Redwood is probably the worst example in the city of Winnipeg, but every real estate professional knows the story. Boeing shopped around, they needed 100,000 feet, they needed it quick, they needed to have it, they needed time to put in some HVAC modifications, because one of the things they do is they've got a resin that has to stay at 72 degrees while it's curing, part of the manufacturing process. So they needed time to get that installed. So this is what we're left with, and my responsibility as an accredited appraiser is, I can't just say to you, I don't like that number because I don't like it. I gotta explain, here's what the least fee is, here's what the fee simple is. Hopefully I won't have to do it again until 2 years from now.
Yeah, and just to highlight that again, we are assessing the fee simple, not the least fee. $6.40 or in that range is not reflective of anything in the market. The assessor has 4 comparables in his brief: $3.12, $4.81, $4, and $4.25. Buildings of a similar size, the subject property, there's nothing in this market over $6. And as Mr. Neufeld indicated, the 500 Madison, which we just heard, is using $5.35 for a building that's half the size. What the assessor is doing here is cherry picking the least rent which hasn't been used on this property or others. So those are my complete comments. Thank you.
Sorry, you
Thank you very
interrupt me, I
much.
did have one more thing to say, because I'll never shut up. The cap rate, and we've heard this countless times, that the assessment department's using, I mean, you generally, in the industrial world, you're gonna get it derived from properties that are leased and like business park style. There are virtually no cap rates out there in the world of manufacturing buildings, very, very few. And a manufacturing building is a different product than a warehouse or a flex warehouse, which is a glorified warehouse, which is actually an office. Manufacturing has shorter lifespan, harder on the building, and you've got to get your money out quicker, which means you need a higher cap rate. If you look in our book, and I didn't go through them all, but we do have manufacturing ones in there that show a very great divergence of cap rates. Manufacturing caps higher. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just one thing, Madam Chair. There was mention of the comparable properties that we did.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think I know where you're going. That was the 500 Madison, not the comps on 500 Madison. And thank you, that it's not in this brief. The comps on 500 Madison, also an industrial warehouse building. Were those rents?
I just wondered where.
Yeah, no,
Oh, okay.
no, thank you. From
Okay, thank you for, everyone. Thank you.
those are my matters. So.
Oh, no, because actually that one's gross. And that one's.
Okay, the next matter on the docket is 90 Paramount Road. Oops.
Are we ready to proceed, Madam Chair?
It's okay, leave Mr.
Sorry,
Baker.
just one point of clarification. My apologies. Mr. Kenner raised the comparable issue. I'm confused again. The comparables that I read out were actually from the board's 2018 assessment. The assessor was actually using a very similar rent of $6.25, but the comparables he had were the ones I listed.
Okay.
So sorry for the confusion there.
They were not
Mr. Kenner,
correct.
but that is it's the rebuttal evidence.
Okay,
I think those are my matters.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so give me 1 second here. So the next one, they say we are now moving to 90 Paramount Road. And on this one, I believe we are dealing with liability, taxation, amount of assessed value, and classification of property. Is that correct, Mr. Neufeld?
Well, sorry, yeah, I think I had a discussion with Mr. Penner on this, did we? Not
I
communicate?
asked about it, and you said you'd let me know if there was.
And I didn't let you know anything? Okay, yeah, no, this is a new client for me, and we knew Mr. Mercury was gonna be here.
So you're blaming it on him?
No. We can't check all the boxes, you know?
So do you have an answer?
I have no comment.
And actually, I had a chance
Safer.
to go and take a quick look at it a few weeks ago, so we were just trying to be safe, that's all. And
I don't believe liability.
we can, no, that's right, I remember this now. No. So we can withdraw those if it's, you'd like that?
Okay, so we're withdrawing liability, taxation, and classification of property. Okay,
Thank
thank you. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so just let me make a few notes. Okay. Okay, so you'll fill out the form and give it to
Yeah.
Mr. Neufeld? Okay, so Mr. Penner, you ready to proceed?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you, Madam
very
Chair.
much.
So the roll number here is 140628788100. The address is 90 Paramount Road. The owner is Pirate 90 to 120 Paramount Road Holdings, Inc. The value in the roll for 2020 is $2,895,000. I've had a look at this property and I'm prepared to make a recommendation at $2,694,000. Mr. Neufeld, is that acceptable?
I haven't heard back from my client on this, so we'll have to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. So the basis of the recommendation is found on page 21. And I'll take you through the original valuation on the left and my thoughts on it, having reviewed the property and the basis for my recommendation on the right. So it's 32,590 square feet. The model net rent on this was $6.71. Vacancy at 3.5%. Shortfall applied, 2% non-recoverables. An NOI of 202,631. To that we applied a 7% cap to come up with the original value of $2,895,000. So the basis of my review is found on the right side there. Turning back one page to page 20, I've looked at the actual rents in place. These are actuals from the rent roll, and found that the actual rent was an overall rate of $6.58. So based on the actual rents in place, and considering those to be a fair indicator of market rents, I've adjusted my potential gross income to $214,440 based on that overall $6.58. I had some concern with the vacancy on this property. In 2015, there was a 12% vacancy, declining to 10.6 in 16 and 6.13 in 2017. So the vacancy was trending in the right direction, but still higher than market in my opinion. So based on that, I bumped the vacancy allowance to 6.5%, which is fairly close to the actual 17 experience. So taking off vacancy gave me an effective net rent, $200,502. Applying shortfall and expenses to that, derived a net operating income of $188,548. This compares to the actual NOI as reported on the mailer of $204,035. That can be found on page 12 of the brief. Net operating income at the top of the middle column is listed at $204,435. So based on allowing a little bit more vacancy and adjusting the rents, come up with an NOI a little bit less than the actual, but what I thought was a more fair predictor of net operating income going forward. To that, we applied an appropriate cap rate of 7% to derive my recommended values, $2,694,000. So the subject property leases are listed on page 2 of my brief, just going back now. This property sold in 2010 for $2.2 million. There's a comparison rents shown on page 3 there, which I believe this shows that the adjusted net rent we used at $6.58 is certainly supported in the marketplace. Page 4 is the original workup, which, as I've noted, I've adjusted and made a recommendation on that basis. Page 6 is their cap rate table. 7% falls well within the range of the 20th to the 80th percentile, and also with the range indicated by the outside sources. Page 8 are some overhead views of the subject property, and some different views shown on page 9 and 10. Again, here's the mailer submission on page 11, indicating 6.13% was the actual vacancy for 17, and we're allowing 6.5% here. Again, page 12 shows the actual NOI reported at $204,000. The rent roll is again shown on page 14. All the leases in place are considered to be net leases with the information given there. So that concludes my presentation. Based on an adjustment, I would like to recommend the value be reduced from $2,895,000 to $2,694,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neufeld, do you have questions for Mr. Penner?
Yeah, sorry. So your first valuation was the model, and the second one was a change in the vacancy rate?
I changed the vacancy rate and I accepted the rents in place.
Okay. Did you add up the rent in place as shown in that rent roll?
Yeah, it's shown on my page 20.
Right, and I didn't see a total on there.
$214,440, shown on page 20.
No, I meant on, okay. I meant on page,
It's
something's missing here, that's all, page 14. And I'm just wondering if we're missing a unit here on their statement as being vacant, that's all. Oh, yes, there it is, right at the bottom, 3455 is not, unit 1112 is not on the rent roll on page 14.
As it's vacant?
Well, it's not on the rent roll, that's all, I was just looking for it, but the income is included at 214, and, but because if you add up the rent roll on page 14, it's 192,756.
Right, excluding one unit.
Yeah, and there was either, I'm wondering if there was a second page, or it was clipped off. I don't have it myself, but.
Yeah, I guess they left that out because it is vacant, so there is no actual lease in place
Okay.
on that unit.
All right. And same question, the wall height, can you determine what the clear height is, whether your 16 represents clear? or
It's shown in our
exterior?
system as 16, and that's all the info I have on that.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terrian?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
No questions.
I have no questions either, so. Mr. Neufeld, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to figure out where this difference was in, and it was just the numbers didn't match up, but now I see it, so it's fine. So we're also using the same start point of 214. I think that was pretty close to what I heard the assessor say. Now, in this case, we were just looking at the market-based vacancy, and now the person who did this workup erred. I'm not changing any numbers, so don't worry about it. That's such a pain.
Not today, you're not?
No, because there's another one down the road that evens it out. The vacancy that should have been looked at for market, Inkster was 5.1, and the city investment vacancy is 5.7, we were at 3.6. The non-recoverables we're using are actually from the statement directly, just the difference between the net and the declared, that's the non-recoverable put in there. And the shortfall, we had estimated at 595, but I found a statement that they had supplied to this company at 479. So it kind of balances out the two of them. So I had worked out the numbers, they're within a few $100s of each other either way, so no point, unless you want me to make us all suffer with the pain of doing it. 181, 188 is our NOI. And it's a little bit off from what the assessor has, but I think our calculation is backed into it the right number. The rate we're using is at the higher end of our Collier's scale for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't take a great vacancy on it. I do have some historical numbers, but this has had spotty vacancy. It fills up and then it empties out and then it fills up. So, for example, I have a statement going back to 2008 with substantial vacancy. And so it's not the best performer. The other issue is the ceiling height, which is actually 14 feet clear. So it's, or as I might want to call it, 2 pallet heights. And not 16 is the external number, 14 clear. I didn't put this in, but I just checked my report here. So that puts us at the higher end of the Collier scale of at 8.25, and the value 2196. I have no responsibility for the number last year. Don't know anything about it. Oh yes, I do. Last year, they used that company from Ontario, the one that doesn't show up. And we know who they are. They don't come to the hearings, so they got fired. I believe that there was some issues with, anyway, I shouldn't talk anymore about that, but yes, there was never, they never had a Winnipeg-based person look at this, at least not since 2008. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Penner, do you have questions?
Just one. So again, the actual reported NOI is 204,035 as per the mailer,
As per poll, yes.
and you believe 181 is more appropriate?
Well, because the 214 is as full. That's what I was trying to work out when I was asking the question. The NOI that they submitted to you with one vacant, the potential rent is 192. So you could use that actual rent and then just add on your shortfall and your other costs and find out that the number would actually be lower.
But the 204 is the actual income with the vacant space in it?
No, it's with the vacant space listed as potential rent.
Right. But
Right.
with the vacant space, they still generated 204,000 in income?
No, they didn't include the vacancy, that's why, okay. The vacant space, we're all agreeing, was unit 112. If you look at the statement, your page 14, for example, that income adds up to 192,756. Then you add in what you have listed on your page 20, another 21,635, and you're going to get 214, approximately 214,442. What they've given is potential rent in their statement.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Terrian.
No questions, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
No questions.
I have no questions. Thank you very much.
$51 off.
Okay, 277 Hutchings Street.
Shall I proceed, Madam Chair?
If you're ready, sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The roll number here is 1406-404-0700. The address is 277 Hutchings Street. The value in the roll for 2020 is $3,192,000. This property was built in two parts, 1970 and a 2011 addition. We have an effective year built of 1982. Zoning here is M2, land area is 111,439, giving a comfortable land to plan area of 4.35%. 4.35, pardon me, not percent. Turning to page 2, we see that the owner has complied with our request for information. There was a sale dating back to 2009 on this property, prior to the second building being built on site. Currently, there's one subject lease in place. This is, the tenant is listed there with the lease starting in 2012 with a net rent of $7.73. And that's shown in the rent roll. Turning the page, we have some comparison properties to support the model rent selected here. Turning to page 4 is our income value workup. So we have the tenanted area there on top, 20,800 square feet, with a model rent of $7.48. The actual rent in place on that space is $767. And then we have the addition, which is an owner-occupied building, built in 2011. The model rent indicated is $840, which reflects a smaller space, a newer building, and more than half of that space, 4,525 square feet, is office space, which would indicate a higher rent. So the overall rent on this property is 28,870 square feet with an overall rent of $7.73 per square foot, to give us a potential of 223,372. To that, we applied a vacancy loss of 3.5%. The EGI is 215,554. 2% expenses and shortfall gives us an NOI of 207,000. Cap rate of 6.5% was selected to give us a capitalized value of $3,192,000. Page 5 is just another look at the income value summary. Page 6 is our cap rate table. Shows that the cap rate selected falls within the 20th to 80th percentile for the city of Winnipeg. Page 7, the MAA excerpts. Page 8 is an aerial view of the subject property located at the corner of Hutchings and Inkster Boulevard. Some other views of the property there. On the bottom of page 9, the original building in place is the one on the left, the larger building. That's the one with the tenant, and the owner-occupied space is the one on the right, which is 4,500 square feet of it is finished office area. A couple of views from the street are shown there on page 10, and as a sketch of the property is shown on page 11 as well. Page 12 is the mailer. Again, it's partly owner occupied, so the rent income on this property is generated from one tenant, whereas there's no rent shown as generated from the owner occupant. The rent roll is shown on page 14. And again, that's where we determine the rent. The monthly rent of $13,391 times 12 months gave us the rent, and divided by the square footage gave us $773 per square foot. This rent must have stepped up in August of 17. As if you look at the mailer and the actual reported, it wouldn't match up, which suggests that the rent had stepped up to what's shown there on the rent roll. But using $13,390 per month times 12 months, $160,000 divided by the square footage gives us the net rent of $773. And at the back of the brief again is the City of Winnipeg order revision addenda information, which we've gone over already, so I won't go through that again. All in all, we think the assessment is fair at $3,192,000. We have one rent in place that we can see, and we know the other space would garner a higher rent based on its percentage of office finish. We believe the rents selected are supported in the market, and a 6.5% cap is appropriate here. And we had asked the board confirm the value at $3,192,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neufeld, do you have questions for Mr. Penner?
Have you inspected this?
I've done exterior inspection.
Well, you said that there was a high degree of office finish in the second building. I'm wondering where that came from.
It's in our files.
In your files. Okay, but you know, that wasn't the result of an inspection.
I'd imagine it was inspected at the time the building was put on.
Okay. You also reported the net rent at, I guess it works out to $160,000 annually, and I take it you did that by taking the mailer rent reporting and multiplying that monthly amount by 12,
That's correct.
and that's on page 14.
That's correct.
Okay. And did you note what it said on page 12 of the number differed? You thought that might be from a renewal difference?
I believe that rent more than likely stepped up partway through the year, and that's why the number is different.
Okay, you don't know for sure though. It's just an estimate?
Well, no, I think that's a reasonable
Well,
explanation.
You haven't seen this though.
I haven't seen that.
Okay. Now, above, they stroked off income type gross. You note that? That's on page 12.
Yes.
So earlier we had one that I called gross, you called net, and I said, I didn't know what he's doing now. What's it in this case, do you know?
Well, I see a rent in place with property tax and general and admin recoveries and annual maintenance recoveries. That would meet the definition of a net rent. Although it's possible they consider it gross as they're
Well,
possibly not.
did you add up those recoveries, for example, and compare them to?
I think they're on the mailer,
Either one.
yeah.
Well, I'll give you the numbers to speed things along.
Well, you can present that in your evidence.
No, I just want to ask you a question on it. The recoveries on page 12 add up to 45,713 on expenses of 79,158, approximately 57%. Would you not expect the same ratio to apply to the floor area for space?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, if this particular tenant is covering up 57% of the expenses, should they not occupy 57% of the space?
I can't really say.
Okay, but in fact, they have 72% of the space, which has been provided to you here. So you think that maybe, if just based on what I'm telling you now, is there a possibility that they're not getting full recoveries?
Yeah, I would say so.
So other than that, this is all model generated?
Yes, the rates indicated there are model generated.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terrian.
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions.
I have no questions either. All right, Mr. Neufeld.
I thought I had a picture here. Okay, I have inspected this site, and my first visitation was 2013. So there's a larger, more of an industrial style warehousing building, and then a smaller building that has a office and equipment storage portion. So when I questioned the assessor about, are you sure it was office finish in there? I mean, the Caterpillars I saw in there didn't really need an office. It's fairly consistent throughout. The other portion that's rented has a larger office area for, they operate a distribution service, last tenant when I was in there. So there's no real difference between the two of them, except the space for the Caterpillar is, it's a flow-through, doors at both ends, and then beside it is an office on the main floor and a lunchroom on the mezzanine level. So what we're looking at that space is very inferior, and that's where we applied these rates. And I thought I had a picture here of it from when I was last in there. Well, I just never looked at my pictures. So the rent we're using is $145, and that's more out of simplicity's sake. What I was pointing out in my questions is that there is an under recovery in the expenses. The tenant occupies 72% of the space, but it only picks up 57% of the expenses. And if you skip ahead to the next one, which is the rent roll, declared here, their recovery rate increases by $4,000, but we don't have the new expenses that go with that yet. But in the last period where it was stated, there's a fairly wide gap on that. So on that basis, we're using 145, which is $695 a foot, which is, in my opinion, slightly higher than market. I do know, well, I hate to admit it, but Mr. Penner was right. There was an increase in August. He told me he had a step-up coming. But his step-up was from 145 semi-gross to 160 semi-gross. So we're using the 145. Other than that, as I mentioned earlier, the vacancy is understated here, and we're not gonna change it. The non-recoverables relate to the actual non-recoverables in place here. And I think the cap rate in our side is a little bit too aggressive. The person who did this has never been in the building. I have. So I would suggest an 8% in this case would be appropriate. It was thought out right. There's a decent land building ratio. The ceiling in the one portion is adequate. It says 9 to 20, and the 9 is the little office portion that goes with the warehouse, but 20, I'm trying to think if it was 18 interior, I can't recall, but it is a little bit better than the ones we've seen today, so I'm probably gonna cap that at 8%, and I don't cap anything lower than 8%, and that's just not for the board, that's for when I do appraisals. I don't believe that number exists in a fee simple environment. I have gone lower in value and use, where we got to measure the strength of the tenant as part of it, but that requires a disclaimer, and it's not for valuation. So my revised number at an 8% cap rate is $2,015,487, rounded to $2,015,000, 2015. The previous value of $2,525,000 is under appeal. And the value prior to that was $2,100,000. Thank you.
Questions?
I have no questions.
Mr. Terrian?
You might have explained it, but the $695 rent, how did you arrive at that figure?
I didn't, someone else did, but I rechecked it here, what I'm trying to do here is, if they had to pay 72% of the expenses, so then shortfall is 15%, we'll call it, 0.15 times 79158. So your shortfall, gross to net, is 11,873. And the rent bumped to what the assessor had at 160. 160. I already lost my page here. Help me out, somebody remember what that number was? 160 something, something, something. 296? Okay, we'll just call it 160. So the shortfall is $12,000 on a semi-gross, so the actual rent is $148,000 net. And we had in 145,616. So I'm fine to change that to 148 as a correction that I caught, but that's gonna make $2,500 difference there, and if we apply the same rent forward, that's another, call it $3,500, that's gonna put your potential up to $201,000. And that'll raise the NOI to roughly $164,000. I can give you the new number. I mean, I'm going very, very quick here. 164, and I'm still fine with 8%. 20,500,000 even.
20 million?
No, 20 million. It's this calculator. He's taking that.
Sold.
2,050,000, I'm sorry.
See, I do pay attention, okay.
A little levity.
Well, Mr. Penner and I are having a lovely day today. Some days we don't, right?
That's the way it is.
We always do, Rocky, you know that.
So my second question was, well, now you've changed the figures, so you'll throw off my
No, I
calculation, no?
it
let
was
me
very
figure-
rough.
Yeah, I was looking at your subtotal of 190, 142. And your non-recoverables and the structurals come up to 12%.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty
Well,
high, that's a pretty high figure. There's part of this building is pretty new.
You know,
And so, you know, there's 2, there's 7, and there's 12. So it makes us,
what do you want to call me? You want to say I'm posturing? Maybe I am.
no,
I-
well,
I want
I'm not
to-
here to pass judgment. I'm just looking at the evidence.
I'm not,
Okay.
I'm not going to support 5% and 2% when I'm dealing with a conclusion of, that the assessor has done this year, which is completely off base. I'm here to remind everybody that this isn't the way it's supposed to be done. And if you're going to come to apply a standard, like the 5% and 2% in the past, and you think it out, there's adequate support. If you want to get adventurous and pretend it doesn't exist, then you have to be faced with reality. This is the actual cost in this building. They have taken it away from a normalized rate to an aggressive rate. And the only thing I can say to people is, let's go back to the way we had to do it before, site-specific. Right? Good point, but you want to change it and work out what the number is, I'm not going to object to it, but I'm not going to be bringing forth 5 and 2.
No, I'm just.
Our concern here, need it fixed, is that there are non-recoverables.
Fine, I'm just looking at the evidence and I'm trying to ask questions on that basis,
Well,
that's all.
you know the point I'm making here?
Well, I think I know that.
No, I'm actually glad,
I've
'cause I'm a
understood.
slow thinker some days. When I presented earlier about the IAAO, it said a review of actual revenue and expenses to help determine your expense ratios. I'm giving that actual review here.
Yeah, yeah, I
Every
know.
time I get one, I'll present it.
I understand that,
Okay.
thank you.
I have no
That's
questions.
all.
And I have no questions, okay.
Oh, no.
And any need for summary from either party?
Yeah, I think it's lunchtime.
Is it?
Great.
That's close.
I know Mr. McIntyre promised to be out at noon, and you're just in time.
I have not delivered that promise yet.